What would you do if you discovered that the disturbing legends about a secluded family in the mountains of West Virginia weren't just bedtime stories meant to scare children, but documented cases that authorities tried to erase for decades? The deeper we venture into the Appalachian backcountry, the heavier the air becomes, thick with decay, silence, and something else we can't quite name. Ahead, the remains of the Whitewood property emerge through the fog, a sprawling farmhouse once hidden from the world, now reduced to a monument of rot and secrecy. Locals say no one who stepped inside ever stayed long enough to tell what they found, and as we cross the rusted gate, the camera light flickers, as if warning us to turn back. But it's already too late. The weathered structure stands as a monument to horrors that many locals still refuse to acknowledge. Its wooden beams groan beneath the weight of secrets buried across 3 generations. The first official record of the Whitewood family appears in county archives, dated 1903, when Tom Whitewood purchased nearly 500 acres of remote forest, all paid in untraceable cash. Land Office records note that he arrived with his wife, Eve, and their 7 daughters ages 4 to 16. At the time, few questioned the property. The post-Civil War era was full of families seeking seclusion, trying to live apart from the growing industrial chaos of American cities. The Westland Courier and the local newspaper briefly mentioned their arrival, quoting that Mr. Whitewood desired privacy and intended to build a self-sufficient homestead away from modern corruption. Decades later, Arnold Scott, grandson of the original county clerk, shared several yellowed papers from his family's archive. Those documents show that Tom Whitewood paid nearly double the land's value, on the condition that no questions be asked about his origins. The clerk's private notes, never meant for public eyes, describe Thomas as a man of unsettling conviction and rigid faith, whose daughters obeyed him with a silence that seemed unnatural. Eve's signature appears only as a crude X, a mark that hints at more than illiteracy, perhaps submission or fear. Within months, the Whitewoods had built their home and outbuildings, all without a single hired hand or witness from the nearby town. The question that still lingers is why. What drove a man to hide his family so completely, and what exactly did he believe was coming for them? Because whatever Thomas Whitewood was running from, it would soon come knocking at his own door. Evil doesn't need help. It just needs people who stay quiet. So if you're watching and not subscribing, guess which side you're on. Don't feed the darkness. Hit subscribe, stay aware, and make them hate your name. Delivery records from the Westland General Store show massive orders of supplies, tools, and building materials, quantities that would have required significant manpower to haul up the winding mountain roads. Yet, according to the ledgers, no one was ever seen helping Tom Whitewood move these shipments. Notes in the store's historical ledgers questioned how a single man could have transported such heavy items alone, from cast-iron stoves to bed frames, all of which typically required multiple handlers. Former postal worker Elisha Drawford, whose father delivered mail along the route to the Whitewood property, shared a disturbing detail from his father's journal. In 3 years of deliveries, he never once saw any of the women or girls, despite hearing female voices from inside the house. Tom Whitewood always met him at the edge of the property, never permitting closer access to the main house. Elijah noted that Tom seemed unusually vigilant about official documents, subscribing to multiple newspapers but refusing any mail that required signatures or records. One entry troubled the postal carrier more than any other. In his personal log dated April 1907, he wrote, "Delivered a package today and heard what sounded like a woman crying from the barn. When I inquired, Whitewood claimed it was a new calf separated from its mother, but I've heard enough livestock births to know the difference between animal and human distress. Something isn't right up there, but without cause or warrant, there's nothing to be done." The first real indication that something far more sinister was occurring at the Whitewood property came in the winter of 1908, nearly 5 years after their arrival. Medical records preserved in the State Archive note that local physician Dr. Sam Courter was summoned to the property to attend what was described as a difficult childbirth. What exactly Dr. Courter encountered inside the Whitewood home remains unclear. His notes are vague, almost intentionally so, and this incident would mark the beginning of a series of events that the locals would whisper about for decades, though few dared approach the estate again. The Whitewood family isn't just a tragedy from the past, it's a warning. Every time someone says things like this don't happen anymore, somewhere behind closed doors it already is. The more people who hear, the harder it becomes for the next Whitewood to stay hidden. Subscribe, stay aware, and help keep the dark from repeating itself. The doctor's detailed notes, sealed until 1965 due to their sensitive nature, describe his arrival at the farm during a heavy snowstorm. To his shock, he did not find Eve Whitewood in labour, but the eldest daughter, Olivia, aged 21. The journal, now housed in the State Medical Historical Collection, contains a chilling entry. The young-looking woman was in clear distress, both physically and emotionally. Upon examination, I determined this was not her first pregnancy, despite no record of her marriage in the county. When the doctor inquired about the father, Tom Whitewood became hostile, reminding him that his duty was to the patient, not to questions of morality. What disturbed the doctor most, however, was Olivia's reaction to her father's presence, a visible trembling that suggested terror rather than the comfort one would expect from a parent during such an ordeal. Dr. Courter's notes continue with the medical details of the delivery, which resulted in a healthy male infant. Yet the final paragraph of the DR's report contained an observation that would later become central to the investigation. Upon leaving the property of Tom Whitewood, he noticed 6 other young women watching from the shadows of the hallway, at least 2 appearing to be in various stages of pregnancy. When he attempted to talk with them, Tom Whitewood escorted him firmly from the premises, warning him sternly never to return uninvited to his property. "I have grave concerns about the welfare of these women I saw," the doctor wrote, "but I am without recourse in such a remote location where the law seldom reaches." Who were these women, and what horrors had been hidden within the walls of the Whitewood estate for decades? This encounter would mark the first official recognition of the family's disturbing practices, a shadow that would only grow darker in the years to come. A new neighbour, a trusted mentor, a family secret nobody questions. That's how it always begins. Whitewood didn't build a nightmare overnight. It grew because no one saw it coming. Get the survival guide in the pinned comment before something similar grows near you. Pretending you're safe won't make you safe. The doctor's concerns apparently reached the local sheriff, as county records show that Deputy Will Pangrove conducted a cursory investigation the following month. His official report, brief and almost dismissive, stated only that the Whitewood family was private, but appeared to be in no obvious distress, and that no evidence of criminal activity was observed. Later testimonies revealed a troubling pattern. Tom Whitewood had been making substantial annual contributions to both the sheriff's re-election fund and the county commissioner's private charities, effectively ensuring official negligence that would continue for years. What came next, however, would alter everything investigators thought they knew about the depths of isolation endured by the Whitewoods. In the autumn of 1910, a local hunter, John Minler, stumbled upon a crude cemetery at the edge of the Whitewood property, hidden beneath overgrown brush and marked only by rough wooden crosses bearing dates but no names. Minler counted 11 graves, some startlingly small. According to his sworn statement given years later during the official investigation, Minler reported his findings to Sheriff Taylor, who allegedly replied that whatever the Whitewoods did on their own land was their business, particularly when it came to family burials. Minler's discovery might have remained a disturbing footnote, if not for the drought of 1911, which forced the Whitewoods to venture farther from their property in search of water. During one of these excursions, 16-year-old Chloe Whitewood, the youngest daughter, encountered a travelling Bible salesman named Stephen Babcock's detailed account, preserved in letters to his brother, describes meeting a painfully shy young woman who seemed completely unaware of the outside world. She begged him for books but pleaded to him that he never mention their meeting to her father. Who were the other young women living under such oppressive isolation, and what had Tom Whitewood been shielding them from for so many years? This encounter marked the first direct contact between the Whitewoods and the outside world, a crack in the family's fortress of secrecy that investigators would soon struggle to understand. The Whitewood story isn't over. Maybe it never will be. The moment people stop paying attention, darkness grows quiet and safe again. Don't let it. Subscribe, keep watching, and make sure the next time this happens, the world is ready to see it and stop it. Babcock, concerned by the girl's obvious fear and isolation, arranged to leave a package of books hidden beneath a distinctive rock formation near the property boundary. Over the following 2 months, he and Chloe Whitewood exchanged letters in the same hidden location, with the young woman gradually revealing horrifying details about life inside the Whitewood household. These letters, later recovered during the official investigation, provide the first direct testimony about the true nature of the family's existence. Father says the outside world is filled with sin and corruption, and that God has commanded him to create a pure lineage through his own bloodline. And Chloe wrote in one particularly disturbing passage, "When each of my sisters turned 13, they were taken to the special room in the East Wing where Father says they must fulfill their divine purpose on earth. Mother tried to intervene once, years ago when it began with Olivia, but Father locked her in the root cellar for so long that when she emerged, she never spoke against him again." Chloe's letters describe a household governed by a strict religious doctrine invented entirely by Tom Whitewood, centered around his belief that the apocalypse was imminent and that only his purified bloodline would survive. She detailed multiple pregnancies among all 7 daughters, with many of the resulting infants failing to survive due to what Chloe referred to as the sickness that comes from Father's blood mixing too closely with itself. These infants were buried in the crude cemetery discovered by the local hunter, while the surviving children were raised to continue what Tom Whitewood called God's great experiment in purity. Yet one detail was even more chilling. In her final letter, Chloe wrote, "Father has begun preparing my nephew, Tom Jr., for his sacred duties when he turns 16 next year. He says the bloodline must—" Chloe's final words cut off abruptly, leaving the full scope of Tom Whitewood's plans a terrifying mystery. This correspondence would become the first undeniable proof of the family's twisted practices, a secret that investigators would soon piece together, step by horrifying step. He says the bloodline must continue, even if something happens to him. I cannot bear to think of my sister's son being trained to carry on this evil abomination. I am planning to escape during the spring gathering expedition and will try to bring as many of the younger children as I can. If you do not hear from me by the first day of May, please alert the authorities in Charleston, and not the local sheriff, who has been duly paid for his silence." Babcock never received another letter. According to his testimony, he waited until midday before traveling to the county seat in Charleston to report his concerns to state authorities. The resulting investigation was delayed by jurisdictional disputes and the outbreak of World War I, which diverted resources and attention away from domestic matters. It wasn't until 1915 that a formal investigation was finally launched, led by state investigator Jude Madison, whose meticulous notes now form the backbone of what is known about the case. Madison began by interviewing residents of surrounding communities and quickly uncovered a disturbing pattern of local knowledge paired with deliberate ignorance regarding the Whitewood family. In his notes he wrote, "The residents of Westland County have constructed an elaborate system of justifications for ignoring what many suspect is occurring on the Whitewood property. Some cited respect for privacy and religious freedom. Others admitted they feared Tom Whitewood's rumored violent temper. Perhaps most troubling, however, were those who had financially benefited from Whitewood wealth, including county officials who should have been the most vigilant. It became clear that the web of secrecy around the Whitewoods extended far beyond the estate itself, entwining powerful figures in the county who had chosen profit and fear over justice. Madison's investigation was only beginning, and the deeper he dug, the more he would uncover the extent of the horrors the Whitewoods had hidden for decades. Armed with Babcock's letters and mounting testimony from the surrounding community, Jude Madison obtained a warrant to inspect the Whitewood property in June 1915. His official report, later classified until 1967 due to its disturbing content, provides a chilling account of what his team discovered upon arrival. The main house was found abandoned, with evidence indicating a hasty departure approximately 2 weeks prior to our arrival, Madison wrote. Inside, the household was organized with almost military precision. Tom Whitewood occupied the west wing. The 7 daughters were housed in a dormitory-style south wing, and a nursery in the north wing contained 11 beds of various sizes. Madison's team eventually discovered a padlocked room in the east wing, the same special room referenced in Chloe's letters. Behind the reinforced door lay what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber, a large bed draped in white linens, walls covered in handwritten religious texts, and a crude altar bearing a leather-bound journal. Scholars would later confirm that the texts were not from any recognized scripture. The journal, written entirely in Tom Whitewood's hand and spanning nearly 12 years, became the most damning evidence in the case. It detailed his delusional religious ideology, which he claimed had come to him through divine revelation during a fever in 1902. Within its pages, Tom outlined his belief that he had been chosen to cleanse humanity through controlled bloodlines, recording in clinical detail his program of breeding with his own daughters, complete with schedules, fertility tracking, and disturbing notes on which combinations produced what he called superior specimens. The full scope of what Tom Whitewood had orchestrated was almost too horrifying to comprehend, and the journal hinted that his plans had extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. This discovery marked the turning point in the investigation, a gateway into the secret world the Whitewoods had hidden for over a decade, and the beginning of a story whose final horrors were only just starting to emerge. Parents, siblings, friends, everyone thinks love alone will keep them safe. But love without awareness is blind. Learn the patterns, recognize the danger, and stop it before it starts. Get the survival guide in the pinned comment before someone you care about becomes another story like this one. Most horrifying were Tom Whitewood's plans for the next generation, in which he intended his grandsons to continue the bloodline with their mothers and sisters once they reached maturity. However, Madison's team uncovered something even more disturbing than the journal. Behind a false wall in the root cellar, they found Eve Whitewood, Tom's wife, chained to a support beam, in a state of severe malnourishment and psychological trauma. According to the medical examiner's report, she had been kept in these conditions for roughly 7 years, fed just enough to survive while subjected to prolonged sensory deprivation and abuse. When questioned, she could provide only fragmented information, repeatedly stating that Tom claimed it was God's will and that the girls stopped crying after the first year. Eve's testimony, recorded in pieces over several weeks as her condition stabilized, revealed that Tom had begun his so-called divine work even before arriving in West Virginia. The eldest daughter, Olivia, had already given birth to a child prior to their move. According to Eve, she had attempted to flee with the children in 1908, but this effort resulted in her imprisonment in the cellar. From that point on, she learned only fragments of what was happening, muffled sounds, brief glimpses when Tom brought her food, and the whispered cries of her daughters. Despite extensive searches of the surrounding forest, investigators could find no trace of Tom Whitewood, his daughters, or the surviving grandchildren. Only the small cemetery remained, now containing 17 graves, some surprisingly recent according to soil analysis. A nationwide alert was issued, yet the family seemed to have vanished entirely. Where had the Whitewoods gone, and how could a family that had lived so openly in the mountains disappear without a trace? The disappearance would spark decades of speculation, sightings and theories, each hinting that the horrors of the Whitewood estate were far from over. The investigation remained active until 1921, when resources were redirected to other cases, leaving the Whitewood file officially marked unresolved. That was, until one piece of evidence revealed the unthinkable. In 1946, 31 years after the initial investigation, a routine inventory of unclaimed safety deposit boxes at the First National Bank of Charleston uncovered a box rented by Tom Whitewood in 1914. Inside was a detailed map marking the locations of 3 other properties purchased under different names in Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina, along with documents establishing new identities for each of his daughters and their children. Most disturbing of all was a letter addressed to whoever discovers this. In it, Tom boasted that his so-called divine bloodline would continue undetected, spreading across the region as part of his apocalyptic vision. According to FBI records declassified in 1975, a task force was assembled to investigate these properties and locate any surviving members of the Whitewood family. What they uncovered was a complex network of isolated communities, each originally centered around one of Tom's daughters and her children, who had been systematically taught to continue the practice of close familial breeding. By the time authorities intervened, the Whitewood bloodline had expanded to nearly 100 individuals across 4 states, many suffering from severe genetic disorders and cognitive impairments resulting from generations of inbreeding. Even after uncovering this horrifying network, investigators could not determine whether any members of the Whitewood lineage remained hidden, fully indoctrinated, and continuing Tom's twisted vision. The case became a decades-long puzzle, one in which every new lead only hinted at the vast and carefully concealed legacy of the Whitewoods, a secret that authorities feared might never be fully unraveled. Dr. Elena Rich, part of the medical team that examined the Whitewood descendants, provided a grim assessment in her report to the Department of Health. She noted that the physical and psychological damage observed among these individuals represented one of the most severe cases of prolonged genetic isolation and inbreeding documented in modern medical literature. Many exhibited characteristic facial abnormalities, reduced cognitive function, and a range of congenital disorders requiring lifelong care. Equally troubling were the psychological consequences of multi-generational abuse and isolation, which had produced a population almost entirely cut off from normal social development and understanding. The 1946 investigation led to the identification and rescue of 73 living descendants of Tom Whitewood, ranging in age from infants to adults in their 30s. Court records indicate that 39 of these individuals required institutional care due to severe physical or cognitive disabilities, while the remaining survivors underwent extensive rehabilitation and were eventually placed with foster families or supportive living arrangements. Adults who were deemed to have knowingly participated in continuing Whitewood practices were charged with various crimes. However, many were found incompetent to stand trial due to lifelong indoctrination and isolation. Tom Whitewood himself was never found. The last confirmed record of his existence was a property purchase in rural Georgia in 1932, when he would have been roughly 70 years old. Some investigators theorized that he died of natural causes in the 1930s, while others feared he may have established yet another isolated community that remained undiscovered. Could Tom Whitewood have continued his dark work in secrecy, leaving a legacy that investigators might never fully uncover? Even decades later, the shadows of the Whitewood family lingered, a chilling reminder of how isolation, power, and delusion can shape a hidden world that few dare to enter. The FBI file on Tom Whitewood remained active until 1960, when it was officially closed with his status listed as presumed deceased. Yet even during the rehabilitation of the Whitewood descendants, something far more disturbing came to light. Several older survivors, when interviewed individually, told strikingly similar stories about their grandfather's other families in distant states, including Oregon and New Mexico. According to their testimonies, Tom Whitewood had spoken of 17 branches of the pure bloodline spread across America. Each branch was supposedly unaware of the other's existence, yet all followed the same strict practices outlined in his twisted religious doctrine. Sindel Babra, a social worker who spent 5 years working with the rescued descendants, recorded this chilling account from one of the older women. "Grandfather told us that when the end times came, all the branches of the family would recognize each other by the mark we all carry, and together we would inherit the cleansed earth. He said there were hundreds of us by now, all living according to the true way, all keeping the bloodline pure as he commanded." FBI analysts later concluded that the woman was likely repeating the propaganda used by Tom Whitewood to control the family, rather than describing verified facts. Nonetheless, investigators quietly conducted inquiries in several western states. According to heavily redacted reports, they discovered 2 small, isolated communities in rural Oregon and Arizona, displaying unusual patterns of genetic disorders and social isolation, but due to legal restrictions and limited resources, they could not conclusively link them to Tom Whitewood. These investigations were never fully pursued. The case of the Whitewood family stands as one of the most disturbing examples of familial abuse and systemic isolation in American history, made possible by a combination of geographic remoteness, community indifference, and institutional negligence. Even now, decades later, the full scope of Tom Whitewood's activities may never be known, as countless records remain sealed and descendants continue to live in obscurity. The shadow of the Whitewoods lingers, a stark reminder of how secrecy, control, and isolation can allow horrors to persist unseen for generations, leaving questions that may never be answered. What became clear over time is that the ripple effects of Tom Whitewood's actions continued to impact multiple generations long after his disappearance. Dr. Alina Rich, who continued working with survivors of the Whitewood case throughout her career, offered this perspective in a 1970 interview with the Journal of Psychiatric Medicine. What makes the Whitewood case uniquely horrifying is not simply the abuse itself, which tragically is not without precedent, but the systematic way in which Tom Whitewood constructed an entire closed society around his delusions. He did not merely commit crimes, he created a self-perpetuating system designed to continue his vision beyond his own lifetime. In that, he was disturbingly successful, establishing what amounts to a multi-generational cult centered around the most taboo forms of abuse imaginable. In 1972, the Westland County Historical Society attempted to create an educational exhibit about the case, aiming to examine how community silence enables abuse. The exhibit was cancelled after descendants of several county officials named in the original investigation threatened legal action. According to society records, the materials collected for the exhibit, including photographs of the Whitewood property and copies of original documents, were placed in sealed storage with instructions that they remain inaccessible until 2015. When researchers attempted to access these materials after that date, they discovered that the entire collection had been destroyed in a suspicious fire at the storage facility in 1983. This discovery marked the beginning of a troubling pattern: systematic attempts to erase the Whitewood case from public record. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, historians and journalists investigating the story encountered unusual obstacles, including missing archive files, denied access requests, and in some cases, direct warnings to abandon their research. Was someone still determined to keep the Whitewood secrets buried, even decades after the family's horrors had been exposed? The story of the Whitewoods serves as a haunting reminder that abuse, secrecy, and systemic complicity can allow darkness to persist long after the perpetrators vanish, leaving a legacy that continues to ripple through history. In 1988, Dr. Kitana Wang, who attempted to publish a detailed account of the Whitewood case, began receiving anonymous letters that included personal information about his family, details that were never publicly available. Court records unsealed in 2010 later revealed that several influential families in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky had actively worked to suppress information about Tom Whitewood due to undisclosed ties to his extended family. Genetic studies conducted in 1995 as part of an unrelated medical project uncovered unique markers present in dozens of individuals across the Appalachian region. This evidence suggested that the Whitewood bloodline had spread far more widely than investigators had documented in 1946. Former FBI analyst Rooney Torres, reviewing the case files before retiring in 2002, estimated that there could be between 500 and 800 living descendants of Tom Whitewood in the United States. Most would be unaware of their connection, several generations removed from the original events. Torres warned, however, that some isolated family groups might still be adhering to the same practices, particularly in remote rural areas where oversight is minimal. Rooney concerns were chillingly validated in 2005 when law enforcement discovered a compound in rural Idaho housing 37 people living under conditions remarkably similar to those recorded in the original Whitewood investigation. The group was led by a man calling himself Tom Shepard, who possessed a handwritten copy of what appeared to be Whitewood's religious teachings. Shepard claimed these doctrines had been delivered to him through divine revelation, and genetic testing confirmed he was likely a great-grandson of Tom Whitewood. These discoveries raised the terrifying possibility that other branches of the Whitewood lineage may still exist today, quietly perpetuating the same disturbing beliefs in hidden corners of the country. Decades after the original crimes, the Whitewood legacy continues to echo, proving that some histories are impossible to fully bury. A new neighbor, a trusted mentor, a family secret nobody questions. That's how it always begins. Whitewood didn't build a nightmare overnight. It grew because no one saw it coming. Get the survival guide before something similar grows near you. Pretending you're safe won't make you safe. The Idaho discovery sparked renewed interest in tracing the extended Whitewood family, though privacy laws and ethical concerns made these investigations difficult. In 2008, the Centers for Disease Control established a confidential registry to monitor the unusual genetic conditions associated with the Whitewood lineage, both to provide medical care for affected individuals and to identify potential cases of ongoing abuse. By 2015, anonymized data from the registry revealed over 300 individuals across 27 states carrying genetic markers consistent with the Whitewood pattern. Dr. Sonia Chen, a genetic counselor working with the registry, noted that the geographic distribution suggested at least 4 distinct family branches had remained largely isolated from outside intermarriage for multiple generations. While 3 of these branches showed evidence of integrating with the broader population beginning in the 1960s and 1970s, one branch in the rural South appeared to have maintained significant genetic isolation until at least the 1990s, raising disturbing questions about whether some aspect of Tom Whitewood's practices persisted into modern times. In 2018, the Southern Poverty Law Center received an anonymous package containing what appeared to be original journals kept by Chloe Whitewood, the youngest daughter, who had attempted to escape in 1915. Forensic analysis confirmed that the journals were authentic period documents. They revealed that Chloe had fled with 3 young children, only to be recaptured by her father within days. Instead of returning them to the main family compound, Tom Whitewood took them to one of his secondary properties in North Carolina, where Chloe remained effectively imprisoned until her death in 1957. Her journals provide a harrowing first-hand account of Tom's evolving delusions over 4 decades, including his growing belief that his bloodline would develop extraordinary abilities through continued interbreeding. Despite decades passing, Chloe's writings hint that some branches of the Whitewood lineage may have survived in secrecy, carrying forward her father's terrifying vision. Even today, the Whitewood story demonstrates how delusion, isolation, and unchecked control can create generational legacies that refuse to be fully erased. During her captivity, Chloe Whitewood documented the birth of 27 children and grandchildren, many of whom were sent to establish new family branches once they reached maturity. The most disturbing detail in her writings describes how her father, Tom Whitewood, personally trained his grandsons to preserve and continue his doctrine long after his death, which she recorded as occurring in 1942. The final entry in Chloe's journal, dated March 3, 1957, reads, "Father's vision spreads like a sickness across this country. Even as my own strength fades, I know that somewhere his chosen ones carry on what he began. I have failed to end this curse. May God forgive my weakness, and may someone someday find these words and understand that the evil has not died. It has only scattered, waiting to take root elsewhere. Seek those who preach purity of blood and isolation from the world. They still carry his madness." To this day, investigations into the Whitewood bloodline continue quietly, receiving little public attention and almost no official recognition. Those who still work on the case, geneticists, social historians, and retired law enforcement, describe a consistent pattern of resistance from local authorities and institutions reluctant to reopen what many dismiss as an outdated or exaggerated story. Yet, every few years, new evidence emerges suggesting the Whitewood legacy remains alive beneath the surface. In 2021, a routine DNA submission to a popular genealogy website exposed a cluster of genetic markers identical to those linked to the original Whitewood lineage. The discovery led researchers to a small, isolated settlement in rural Missouri, a community of roughly 50 people descended from a man who appeared there in the 1950s under the name Tom Wright. No direct signs of ongoing abuse were found, but investigators documented an unusual cultural emphasis on family purity and a marked distrust of outsiders. Local residents refused DNA sampling and declined to participate in interviews, reinforcing suspicions that this quiet settlement might represent the most recent surviving branch of the Whitewood line. The Missouri discovery reignited questions that had haunted investigators for nearly a century. If the Whitewood bloodline truly spread this far, how many other hidden enclaves might still exist, living quietly under new names? Every generation seems to rediscover the same truth. What began as one man's delusion did not die with him. It adapted, it hid, and perhaps it waits. Dr. Jude Madison, who has devoted over 15 years to studying the Whitewood case and its lingering effects, offers a grim perspective that cuts to the heart of its enduring horror. What makes the Whitewood case truly disturbing, Madison explains, isn't simply the scale of the abuse, it's its persistence. Most patterns of familial exploitation eventually fracture under the weight of exposure, death, or time. But Tom Whitewood engineered something far more insidious, a self-sustaining system built on faith, fear, and isolation. It wasn't just a family. It was a mechanism designed to survive him. The Whitewood story stands as a haunting testament to what happens when isolation is mistaken for piety, when authority goes unquestioned, and when entire communities choose not to see what festers behind closed doors. It forces an uncomfortable question: how many similar systems have taken root in the shadows, unseen, simply because no one dared to look? The true terror, Madison argues, is not confined to the past. It lies in the idea that the echoes of Whitewood's ideology may still reverberate in quiet corners of modern life, in secluded communities, in families that keep too many secrets, in the silence that follows suspicion. One survivor from the 1946 rescue, whose words were preserved in a faded transcript, summarized that silence better than any investigator could. The worst part wasn't what happened to us. It was that people knew. They suspected, but they said nothing. They heard the crying and told themselves it wasn't their business. That's how it begins. That's how evil grows, not from monsters but from those who turn away. Today, more than a century after Thomas Whitewood's first delusions took hold, the ruins of the family estate lie swallowed by the forest. The stone foundation is cracked, the air thick with moss and silence, but those who visited the site claim the ground still feels wrong, as if it remembers. For researchers like Madison, the case remains unfinished, a wound that refuses to close, a mystery that keeps whispering from the past. And if Whitewood truly believed his bloodline would endure long after him, then perhaps, somewhere in the quiet corners of America, his vision still breathes. If you've watched this far and still haven't subscribed, I've got bad news. That means you're siding with Tom Whitaker. That's right, you're basically helping his pure bloodline stay hidden another 100 years. Hit that button before the rest of us start asking questions, okay? As our research team began packing up to leave the overgrown clearing where the old Whitewood residence once stood, a local woman named Melena Jennis approached us. She carried a weathered leather pouch that, she explained, had been passed down through her family for generations. Inside was a faded photograph, a stern, bearded man flanked by 7 young women with hollow expressions, all dressed in identical handmade garments. My grandmother was the midwife who helped deliver some of the babies before Dr. Porter ever came around, Jennis said softly. She kept this picture as proof, thinking someone might come asking one day. But no one ever did. After a while, folks just stopped mentioning the Whitewoods altogether. She motioned toward a ridgeline thick with tangled oaks and hemlock. There are still people up there, families that keep to themselves. You'll see 1 or 2 of them in town, maybe once a year, just long enough to buy supplies. Nobody asks where they're from or who they belong to. Around here, that's just how it's always been. When asked whether she believed those families might still be connected to the Whitewood bloodline, Jenkins hesitated, her gaze fixed on the darkening forest. I can't say for sure, she said finally, her voice lowering to a near whisper. But sometimes when the wind moves through those trees just right, you can hear sounds, maybe singing, maybe crying. Hard to tell. Whatever it is, it don't sound like it wants to be found. Some things are better left buried, especially when their roots run that deep. As we drove away, the wind rose again, carrying what sounded like distant singing. Later, while reviewing our field recordings, Dr. Madison paused on the final minute of audio, a faint male voice whispering, "The blood remembers." That perhaps best encapsulates the lasting legacy of this case. The most terrifying thing about the Whitewood case isn't just what happened, it's how effortlessly it happened. How one man's twisted conviction could create an entire world built on silence, obedience, and fear. How could he create a closed system of abuse that potentially continues to reverberate through American society a century later? It makes you wonder how many other Tom Whitewoods might still be out there, tucked away in the forgotten corners of America, living just beyond the reach of anyone who might ask the wrong questions. The Whitewood files remain open in the FBI's cold case archives. New discoveries continue to emerge. Fragments of diaries, unmarked graves, strands of DNA connecting strangers who never knew they shared the same bloodline. Each revelation adds another unsettling layer to a story that refuses to stay buried. For the descendants who walk free today, the past is never truly gone. It lingers in their names, in their faces, in the uneasy knowledge of what once was. The curse of the Whitewood name is not just its history, it's its persistence. And somewhere, deep in the woods where the original homestead once stood, the wind still carries faint, unplaceable sounds, a low hum that could be singing or weeping, or something in between. Some say it's just the trees, others say it's the Whitewoods, reminding the world that evil doesn't die, it only hides.